to follow up a little bit on Diana Moss and this globalization business. In 1999, I had a reason to call the Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman. I had been blackballed by the big meat packers. I went from 1978 having 20 buyers of potential packers that I could sell my cattle to in St. Francis, Kansas, to having none. I had 14,000 head of cattle and a 12,000 head feedlot. And people say, whoa, that's a lot, but why so many? It's because I couldn't sell them, and I still had them coming in. And these weren't all my cattle. They were mostly other people's cattle. I was a custom cattle feeder. And I'd already sued IDP for anti-competitive practices. In 1996, I had been raising all the hell I possibly could, and they just had enough of it. And they decided, we're not buying your cattle anymore. And so that was finally revealed to me by my buyer from National Beef, who was the only packer buying from me at the time. I called the Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman, whose responsibility it was to enforce the Packers and Stockyards Act, which should have prevented that sort of discrimination and behavior by the packers. And I said, Dan, my former legislator, representative from Kansas, I said, Dan, why don't you enforce the Packers and Stockyards Act? And he responded, Mike, in this global market, we need big competitors, big companies that can do business globally. And I said, well, what am I going to do? What about our markets? What about local markets and the ability for independent people, smaller operators, to be able to sell their animals? Don't have an answer for you. And he's from Kansas. This is Dan Glickman from Kansas, you know, the son of a junk dealer down there in Wichita or somewhere. And he goes to Washington and he drank the Kool-Aid. I mean, he was all about the corporate interests and globalization. And so basically what he did, he was kind enough to call ConAgra, which was, they bought Montford. And he called them and he said, you need to buy all of my Callicrate's cattle. And they did. Over the next 100 or so days, as those cattle became market ready, they bought every single one of them. And they just paid a price, not necessarily a great price, but I got out of the business. I was forced out of the business. 15 families went to St. Francis, Kansas without jobs, and I had an empty cattle operation, and I was done. That's the mentality of the globalization thinking about what Diana Moss was talking. And I am so encouraged right now that thinking is beginning to shift. And you know, Joe, you had an experience, Will, and I was with you in Missouri, with one of the most amazing initiatives that I have ever seen evolve within your state, which is a really important ag state. I mean, Missouri has got lots of black land, lots of agricultural wealth that comes from that state. And it's important to know that in agriculture, farmers are wealth creators. Many of you may have heard me say before, a farmer puts a seed in the ground, adds water and sunshine, and is in a continual miracle, wealth's created. And Missouri is that in spades. And it is where big corporations want to be, at least in the position to extract that wealth. And so there was a right to farm amendment introduced in Missouri that was voted on this summer. I wanted you to.
Mike, you and I spent more than one round of fights in Missouri. The first time I met you, you may recall, I was in the Missouri Senate. We had just passed an initiative in Missouri. Missouri is second only to Texas in the number of family farmers. So we have had a strong heritage in family farm and ranching tradition. And are very proud of that tradition, not unlike ranchers here in Colorado or any of the ranchers and individuals here. But we had passed the bill. I passed the state bill that gave the Attorney General of the state of Missouri the power to enforce the GIPSA. You mentioned about the Packers and Stockyard Act. That's what that is, Packers and Stockyard Act. It wasn't being enforced at the federal level, so I said our Attorney General can enforce it. And I also, in that bill, passed a state COOL, country of origin labeling, which you heard a little bit about earlier, how NCBA, using cattlemen's tax dollars, worked to defeat the national COOL legislation. I passed that in Missouri in the 90s. There became one heck of a fight. And I saw Mike Callicrate was up on a platform. We had probably 2,000, maybe 20, somewhere about 2,000. I think that
Just a few more than we have here today.
yeah, about 2,000. About 2,000 farmers showed up to hear Mike Callicrate in Missouri. He draws a little better there than he does at home. Profit. The cattleman had just sued me to repeal that bill. And
The NCBA cattle.
NCBA cattlemen. Now, not Mike and the independent cattlemen. They were debating the NCBA cattlemen in my home state. And it was quite a run. The end deal was, unfortunately, the man who was leading the cattlemen there in Missouri had nowhere to go when I challenged him from the balcony. And I made his wife cry, and I felt a little bad about that. But Mike and I have been fighting together for almost 2 decades. And again, when we were beginning to see an opportunity in Missouri, and Tim said it very well, and I'm going to play upon, I absolutely agree with what Tim said, and he said it quietly and was introducing others that would speak and didn't give a large presentation this morning, but food is the gateway. So using that strategy to build new coalitions, we called upon our friends to include Mike Callicrate to come into Missouri. Dr. John Eicher, who is a professor emeritus of the University of Missouri now, running a center in Iowa, came in. So individuals that really know about ag economics and real rural economy and traditional agriculture. Traditional agriculture, you know, naturally, us folks just naturally think about the animal. We believe in animal husbandry, right? So it's not far-fetched that we would understand caging 290 million laying hens in a space smaller than that piece of paper in front of Mike is just wrong. And so pulling together around the gateway of food, bringing in the foodies, the young people, the animal welfare individuals, the environmentalists, the traditional, humane, sustainable agricultural leaders, as I had mentioned, we put on a heck of a showing in Missouri that I believe should be something that everyone in this room and around the country that believes in their environment, believes in animal welfare, believes in rural economy, believes in family farming and ranching should take a look at and emulate as a way to go forward to push back against big ag. I agree with Nona said today about needing to engage. We do need to engage at the ballot box. We need to engage at these initiative petitions. We need to push back. You got one right here in Colorado, and the way to build those coalitions. But yeah, Mike and I have been working together to find a way to do that. We put 2,000 farmers in that stadium, that sale barn that night when we signed the bill that Governor Carnahan, Senator Wellstone came in, a great ag leader. We lost him in an airplane crash, not unlike Governor Carnahan when he was running for the U.S. Senate. And I don't remember how many people. I think Bill Heffernan was there, maybe Judy, a lot of us was there, but there was probably 5,000 people came to see this bill sign. One of the things I would say to everyone is that in the 90s, we were still able to muster as America's traditional family farmers and ranchers the numbers it took to pass legislation. The lock was not on our Capitol domes by industrialized ag at that time. And we could muster and be able to win. Today, if we in agriculture would all mount our horses and charge, not that we won't fight, as we've been doing for years, but there's not enough of us left to penetrate the line. And we have to find ways, using, I think, food as the gateway, to build those coalitions and welcome in those individuals from these other communities. They want to know, they want to be part of our world, and we need to allow them to be part of it. And that's what we did in Missouri. We were down 40% 6.5 weeks out. We were outspent 3-1 from that period forward. We raised $500,000. They raised a little over $1.5 million. They used checkoff dollars against us. We have filed complaints on that. And we got within 0.25%. We lost by 2,315 votes out of a million cast. And it's the only time in my political career, and I've run a lot of races to include my own, that I've ever lost, I felt like I won. So I thought it was a great opportunity to demonstrate those kind of coalitions.
Well, what was amazing to me is the Secretary of State approved an initiative title that was Right to Farm. That on its face was deceptive.
Yeah.
Missouri farmers already had the right to farm.
That's right. In Missouri law since 1975, family farmers and family farm corporations in Missouri, not unlike many other agricultural states, have protections in the law. You can't sue me off my land, you can't zone me off my land, and foreign corporations can't own my state or unfairly compete against me because of the ability to manipulate the international monetary system. And we have had that right since 1975. Not only did the Secretary of State do that, but my good friend, Secretary Kinder, also endorsed the measure the day before the election.
Right, and it wasn't at all about the right to farm for family farmers and ranchers in Missouri. It was about China's right to farm in Missouri. And so it was a major education effort, which you undertook in an amazing way to get that close to winning. And the fact is, if you'd have had another week, you probably would have won. But most certainly, had Missouri seen the PBS news item that was out last week about the Chinese state involvement in the purchase of Smithfield. This was a PBS report last week, and in fact, the Smithfield had denied any involvement of the Chinese government in Shineway's purchase of Smithfield. And in fact, when PBS did their in-depth investigation, found that the Bank of China approved that loan in one day, $5 billion. Approved it in one day, and it was a requirement that Shineway, in their purchases of other companies or in the way that they conducted their business, that it was in line with the Chinese 5-year plan of feeding itself. And so right there, the Chinese made us part of their plan. We don't have our own plan. We are part of the Chinese plan, and this initiative was to accelerate not only the 50,000 acres Smithfield had already bought. All we have done is wake up these guys in our state legislatures, and Smithfield had already come back and had the right they got to buy 50,000 acres in Missouri, the best black dirt on the planet. And so Shineway was buying that, the Chinese support company was buying that, but now they get to own Missouri. Now with the right to farm for China, they can actually own Missouri, the entire state if they want.
You know, one of the things on these right to farm initiatives, and I know Paul's here, the Farm Bureau in the Tulsa paper here a month ago, Oklahoma paper, stated that they would push for the right to farm again this year. They're needing to go state by state and break these family farm acts that were put in place. Paul was probably in the Senate in Oklahoma and he fought for the family farmer against this kind of advancement. What has happened, the largest pork company in the United States today is foreign owned. It's owned by China, it's Smithfield. The largest beef and poultry producer is Brazilian, JBS. You saw their names flashed up here several times. We're in a position that, you know, this globalization is now coming back to really bite us in our food sovereignty. We're seeing China with their 5-year plan as published by PBS. The other fact is that the individual with Shineway that orchestrated the deal, the CEO of that, as reported in very credible reports, and I'm happy to provide those for you, is also a member of the Chinese parliament. So not only did the bank do it in one day, but he has advanced the 5-year plan of China. China is in real bad shape. They have no standards on their environment. They have, as reported in Mother Jones, have polluted 40% of their arable land with chemicals, over-fertilization, animal waste, pollution. And so they're now struggling to how they're going to feed this growing demand. And they decided, you heard earlier today, they're buying up farmland in Africa. Their strategy is to buy up other countries' farms and farmland. In Missouri, foreign corporations could not own Missouri land. To allow the Smithfield deal to go through, the Missouri legislature made an exception for that particular deal, which equaled 50,000 acres of Missouri's farmland and the largest pork production in the state, fourth in the country, processing plant. The governor vetoed it, and the legislature overrode the governor. And the right to farm, because as we all know, you can't distinguish between corporations and individuals. We know that the Supreme Court has now granted protection to corporations and allowed them to have free speech. Corporations, I won't go into that, it would take too long for this presentation, but you need to understand the whole series of U.S. Supreme Court decisions that have solely granted corporations the same rights as people, and how when that right to farm passes, what will be challenged is that ban on foreign corporation ownership of Missouri farmland. Smithfield's now landlocked, and this will allow them to expand their growth within my state. And so that's what the battle was over. We was able to use these coalitions through food to talk about transparency in food, talk about the animals' welfare, the farmers' welfare, the environmental impact, using examples in Des Moines, Iowa. The city of Des Moines, just a few months ago, Chris is here, Peterson's here, he works on the Ag Council up there as well as with SRAP and knows a lot about this, but the city of Des Moines had to increase their expenditures by $4 million on capital to redo their water treatment plant, and $1 million more a year in operational costs just to clean the manure out of the river so that people can drink it. This externalization of the cost of these foreign corporations' advancement of building more CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations in this country, you, the taxpayer, are bearing that cost. They're externalizing that cost. We can no longer, as Dr. Eichert says, afford this cheap meat policy, because it's not cheap. Family farmers have to compete against large corporations who are able to externalize their damage to our economy, rural economy, their damage to the farms, their damage to the land, their damage to the water. And they externalize those costs on the backs of the taxpayers. No different than NCBA is stealing the tax money of the cattlemen and using it against their interests in the capitals across this country.
Joe, what other states do you expect to see the right to farm initiatives to pop up, and what's really behind, what's the driving force behind those right to farm?
The right to farm initiative in the beginning began with the Koch brothers and ALEC. And I know Chris Leonard, I think, is now putting pen to paper and going to talk a little bit about how the Koch brothers originated their power and their wealth. But if you go to the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, you can see the first framework of a very conservative think tank that brings in conservative state legislators, and then they leave armed with these boilerplate bills to go home and to file. It began with ALEC, but the American Farm Bureau Federation has advanced the concept of making that, because ALEC did statutory thoughts, and the American Farm Bureau Federation is really pushing to make constitutional changes. Now let me give you a quick point. James Madison offered, now there were a lot of amendments to our Constitution, and any one of them could have been the 11th one, if you will. But Madison offers one that would have limited corporations' power and ability to be treated the same as people, as citizens within our U.S. Constitution. During that debate, it was rejected by the delegation because they said that is a state's issue to regulate corporations. It's not a federal issue to regulate corporations. That was the original thought. You used to have to go to the state. To be a corporation, you had to actually pass legislation to be incorporated. That was the beginning way corporations had to be formed. Our country didn't necessarily like corporations. You know, Thomas Jefferson said an unrestricted, uncontrolled corporation would be a greater threat to this country than the standing armies of our enemies. So it was rejected at the federal level because it was at the state level. So a lot of our states do have restrictions on certain things corporations can do. by putting right to farm in the Constitution, and because corporations have now at the Supreme Court level, U.S. Supreme Court level, have been granted individual rights, it's a mechanism for corporations to be able to bust through those, what they consider discriminatory laws that protect family farmers and family farm ranchers, and whether that's tax credits that go to only certain sizes so that they're prevented from having tax credits in some states, or whether that's the ability to actually own farms. And I see Oklahoma's announced next. In Indiana, a group of us kept it out of the Constitution, but it is in the state statute. That's not as much of a threat. I don't think it'll come back there. We're expecting maybe in Iowa, we think that most of these ag states that do have some type of protection to family farmers will ultimately see right to farm. They have to be thinking about whether they want to go forward. We didn't win in Missouri, but we cost them some money, and it wasn't pretty. And it gave us one heck of a platform to educate a very large base of Missouri's consumers. By using food as the gateway, we got the agriculture, the sustainable ag leaders, Missouri Farmers Union was way out front on this. Missouri Rural Crisis Center, our main driving engines for humane, sustainable agriculture in our state, were way out front. He gave them a platform to talk to the people in the cities, to talk to the animal welfare folks. HSUS's membership, over 100,000 in the state, gave them a platform to introduce those consumers to what agriculture done right in the state, and to be able to highlight those things that are wrong in the state when it comes to agriculture. So I do think that Big Ag is probably going to think a little bit more. But I do understand from the quote from the Farm Bureau person in Oklahoma, they're going to go forward in Oklahoma.
You mentioned Thomas Jefferson, and I recall the quote from Abraham Lincoln after the Civil War. He says, as a result of the war, corporations have been enthroned. And he said, I fear more for this republic the power of corporations than I do the war itself. He says, as a result of this concentration of power and wealth into the hands of a few, our freedom will be lost. And he said, and they will work upon the prejudices of the people until all wealth is in their hands. So corporations have been feared for a very long time. And you know, you look at the very beginning of our country, the corporation that we feared was the East India Company.
Sure.
And their close alignment with the Crown.
Absolutely. The Tea Party was as much a rejection to corporate power and this concentration and monopoly action as it was against the Crown.
Absolutely.
They were torqued at the Crown because the Crown was endorsing this large corporation to take over all of the trade. And they couldn't break through the barrier. The small producers in America couldn't get through trade without having to go through the Crown's anointed corporation. No different than what we're seeing today.
Exactly. We've got the same relationship between government and corporations as we had then. Are we going to wake up? Are we going to continue to be divided on our prejudices? And so tell me about your thoughts on those prejudices and how we break through and collaborate.
But yeah, I tell you, the first thing is that when your enemy is telling you who your enemy should be, turn them off. Quit reading. It's just mind-boggling to me that we, most probably us in the room, will listen to our enemy about who we should be listening to. I joined the Humane Society of the United States and then became their Vice President of Outreach and Engagement. I first was their Director of Rural Development and began to find a way to have a conversation, a dialogue between animal welfare individuals and agriculture. And also to have a conversation with environmentalists. Through diversionary, I started off being a campaigner. I was a campaign staff person. I worked for Dick Gephardt back when he was leader. And I've spent a lot of time in the field. I'm a field operative. I did run myself, became a state rep, state senator, lieutenant governor. I've been the head of the caucus programs. I'm a founding member of a department of the DNC. And so I'm a Democrat, and I've done a lot of field work. And the thing that always amazes me is when my enemies are able to beat me through either they use scare tactics or fear, and they use diversionary politics. What do I mean by that? Big Ag is wrong on all the issues. Everybody in this room, I believe, would agree to that, unless we got somebody here, from the Farm Bureau that wants to listen in, and I hope we can convert you today. The Big Ag is wrong on the issues. They cage animals. There's not one of us farm boys or girls that believe it's right to put aside. I raise pigs. Chris Peterson raises pigs. Mike now raises pigs. It's just wrong to put a sow all her adult life in a 2-foot by 7-foot cage. Who would think that's the right thing? It's wrong to put those laying hens in that little space that they get. It's wrong to live off the tails of a dairy cow unless she's got something wrong with her. But Big Ag wants to paint animal welfare folks as the enemy. They tell agriculture leaders and us farmers and ranchers, you got to watch those people. They're going to drive you out of business. Then the next thing they do is they take the Sierra Club and they make them the biggest villain of all. Right? Anybody wants to take care of the environment, they're going to drive you out of business. They're going to run you off the land. We, farmers and ranchers, for too long have believed that's who our real enemy was. All the time, through this concentration of power in the marketplace, they drove more and more and more of us off the land. When I began farming, around 1978, there were over 600,000 pig farmers in America. Today, there's 67,000 left. We've lost 1 million farmers since 1980. All the time, we farmers knew our enemy was animal welfare people, environmentalists. No, it's not. It's not. It's Big Ag. It's the things like they tried to do to Mike Callicrate back in the 90s. You're too small, Mike. You've got to go away now.
Tried to do it. They did.
Well, he's back. God love him. Put his body in it. He's a success story. We've got Chris is a member of a selling group of pigs. He's got a success story for family farmers. My brother runs a pig co-op. We move 1,100 animals a week. You don't have to cave in. The enemy is not the environmentalists or the animal welfare folks. So diversionary politics is getting us beat. The thing that we need to do, and the way we can win, is find the common ground that we share. I'm disappointed every day that I couldn't take my kids to fish in the same creeks that my granddad took me to fish in. That's just a crying shame. It almost makes me cry thinking about it. That I couldn't share those same opportunities because of what agriculture has done in my state. It's a shame when the citizens of Des Moines, Iowa have to pay $4 million to upgrade because some big foreign corporation is going to dump a bunch of hog poop in the river. The people that care about that drinking water, the people that care about those animals, are not our enemy. The best thing to remember is the enemy of, what I said at the beginning, right? If your enemy is telling you who your enemy is, quit listening. But remember, the enemy of your enemy is probably your friend. So start reading about who else is opposed to this kind of activity in the marketplace and who else it's harming. And those are the people start associating with, joining. And that's how we darn near, being outspent 3-1, we at least crawled up Big Ag's leg and poked him in the nose on August the 6th. So it was a good day.
I was at the RCAP gathering in Cheyenne, Wyoming a couple weeks ago. And Michael Stumo was there. Michael Stumo was our original executive director for the Organization for Competitive Markets and one of our founding members, and really just an amazing person. And right here in Colorado Springs, about 7 years ago, we founded the OCM, this gathering you're at right now, founded the Coalition for Prosperous America. and it really focuses a lot on trade issues. You know, China's currency manipulation is a big deal. They have blocked any hope for fast track ever happening again. They've got 3 million followers now within that organization, which includes steel and manufacturing and agriculture, labor unions, imagine that. We've got labor unions now working with the manufacturing folks. But the whole thing is they've focused on what they all have in common. They do not agree on everything. And so what was cool about what Michael Stumo said to the folks in RCAP, and these are all just a bunch of ranchers, that think HSUS is someone to be very careful with, right? And Michael Stumo basically said, and of course this is already after you and I have been working together for years, and I mentioned to RCAP 4 or 5 years ago that we need to be working with consumer groups, including perhaps animal welfare groups. And of course, it kind of went in one ear and out the other, and then it became a reality, and they railed against it. In fact, I wasn't even hardly welcome at RCAP, and I was a founding member as well, along with Reed Kelly, and your wife Kathleen was a founding board member. And so what was cool is Michael Stumo said to this group on that weekend in Cheyenne, Wyoming, that if you've got a coalition and you agree with everybody on everything, your coalition's too small.
It's clearly not a big enough coalition to beat multi-billion-dollar foreign corporations that exist.
Absolutely, and Ferris, you know, you were here for the film, the Hannah Ranch film this week, and that is a wonderful example of a cowboy in Colorado, a well-respected cowboy, Kirk Hanna, reaching out to the environmentalists and saying, hey, let's work together on this stuff. The rancher is the environmentalist. But you know what? He can do a lot better job if he's got a living income. Right? So there's some really great examples of the importance of collaboration and working together. And this has really been in the focus of OCM for some time now. And other groups are starting to get it a little bit. But by the time I left RCAF on Sunday morning, they were talking to me. I wasn't the bad guy anymore. And of course, we've made great strides in our fight against the beef checkoff and the way it's been used. And so really encouraging that we're starting to think together. But the fact is, you know, the Cowboys weren't believing that 95% of HSUS supporters, members supporters, ate meat. They are not a bunch of vegans and vegetarians.
No, but they represent a very broad-based group of individuals that care about how animals are handled.
Right.
And they recognize that the U.S. is going to continue to produce animals for human consumption, and that having a dialogue about how that's done is the right way to build a coalition. You know, the coalition we formed in Missouri, we lost by 2,300 votes out of 1 million, but we stuck together. And a month later, Big Ag had passed, overwhelmingly, a bill, an omnibus ag bill. In that ag bill, it would have expanded foreign ownership of farms to foreign corporations. It would have allowed for a beef tax increase, the issue you all were talking about earlier. And it also determined that captive deer was livestock. And we have, they wanted it to be regulated by the Department of Ag because the captive deer population, they've imported these deers in for, you know, where you genetically raise them to have bigger antlers, you put a salt block out and you let some guy kill them for $15,000 or $20,000, you call that sports. But anyway, I hunt deer in the wild, I don't consider that sporting. But anyway, they brought in chronic wasting disease that is now impacting our wild deer population. And so it was a perfect time again to keep this coalition of animal welfare, environmentalists, the cowboys, the independent cowboys in our state on the beef tax, and the Sustainable Farmers Union was still involved in MRCC. And for the first time, the governor vetoed the bill, and it was the only bill that we sustained the governor's veto on. And we shut them down. They had hired 17 lobbyists, dang near every firm in Jeff City except one of my old law partners who we hired. And and we won by 1 vote. So they barely beat us and we barely beat them. So right now we're tied 1-1, and we hope our coalition stays together. But what's important is to keep the coalitions going, keep the dialogue going. We've been working with OCM now for over 2 years, HSUS, and other farm organizations. We got a relationship with John Hanson, the Nebraska Farmers Union, Ohio Farmers Union, and others. I'll leave some out. But anyway, we've been sitting down, and the key is, I think, to really win and push back against these legislators in these capitals is to keep that dialogue going. And when you hit a hiccup, don't walk away from each other, but stay at the table. And remember, these different groups, these communities, we share more in common than we don't. And the enemy of my enemy is probably my friend. And if you can do that and keep the coalition going, I think that we will begin to have success again. Now, unlike what we did in the 90s when sustainable ag was willing to push back. We got cool, we got the gypsy stuff in the Farm Bill. A lot of great people worked on that. We were having successes in this country, and then there just began to be too few of us, and we have to build coalitions if we're going to win.
And it starts at the states. Starts at the states, starts at the local level and works its way up to the national level, and which brings about the GMO right to know. And so a couple weeks ago, I was on a panel, a proponent's side of the panel in Colorado, the Citizens Review Initiative, CRI. And it was an effort to bring people together around the state. There was 20 citizens, as opposed to consumers, right? Citizens around the table. And they were evaluating this GMO Right to Know initiative and whether or not to vote for or against it. And so I'm on the proponent panel. As a farmer, I'm the only farmer they could find. We're still looking for another farmer that will speak out, talk about intimidation and with Monsanto and those. But what was interesting is no one had to hold up their hand and take the oath, which may not have made any difference anyway. But on the opponent side, which Farm Bureau sat on, and there were farmers there speaking on behalf of Monsanto, how badly they needed those GMOs, and it's just wonderful, and it's going to cost too much to pass this initiative. You've heard it all before, at least I've heard it all before, but what was most hurtful to me is Farm Bureau lined them up to try to defeat the initiative that would give farmers more choice in seeds and restore some freedom back into the marketplace and informing consumers of what they were buying at the grocery store. Farm Bureau, that's got farm in the word. And they have been an advocate nonstop since they were formed for the more industrial type agriculture, opposing the interests of family farmers. And they've got people like my friends in Cheyenne County, Kansas, that just think they're wonderful. They don't have a clue. It's kind of like the folks with the beef checkoff. There's a lot of ranchers out there that don't agree with us on the checkoff because they read the NCBA propaganda of why it's such a great deal. And they're busy people, they're good people, but they're busy people, and they're not getting the information that they need. So we see our own supposed farm organizations standing against us, making it even that much more important, I think, to connect with consumer groups.
Absolutely.
So the GMO Right to Know, you've got to vote for it.
What is it, 105?
We need to know what's in our food.
What is it, 105?
105, you got to vote for it. And in California, the GMO labeling bill was opposed by Monsanto and $47 million. In Colorado, it'll be interesting to see how much money they spend.
You'll probably outspend a little more than 3 to 1.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you very much. I have a comment, a couple of questions too, and then I want everyone to ask questions here. Joe, regarding the enemy, telling us who our enemies should be, and they use fear, and I heard something a few months ago that I think would be appropriate. It's 4 simple words. It's fear is a liar. You know, fear is a liar, quite honestly. Anybody who's trying to scare you is not telling you the truth. And that's the worst kind of diversionary politics.
Yeah, unfortunately, Tim, people react in the voting booth out of fear more than anything else. That's very unfortunate, but it's just fact. That type of politics works, unfortunately. That's why I really wanted to stress continuing the dialogue. The best way to resolve that tactic from working is to have an ongoing dialogue with your coalition and building community. Because then the fear doesn't work, right? Because you know them. Well, I know those folks, you know, they share my value. They want the grandkids to be able to fish out of that stream.
Working together and communicating is what they fear the most.
That's what they fear.
Exactly. That's right. And that's our leverage.
There's an article in Beef Magazine. I can't remember the gentleman's name that wrote it. He loves me so much, but he compared HSUS to ISIS. And at the end,
Troy Marshall. Troy Marshall was his name.
At the end of it, he said that the biggest thing they had to fear was that HSUS was working with agriculture. So you're right. They fear that the most.
Yeah.
And Troy Marshall is my neighbor.
Oh, is that right? Can I go meet him?
He lives in Burlington, north of Burlington, Colorado.
I need to go shake his hand.
Just southwest of my place.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Troy's a good guy.
Oh, yeah?
Honestly,
He would like me if he met me. I'm convinced of it.
I've had lunch with Troy. Troy's a good guy, but he's you know, he's got an issue. He's got blinders on,
Yeah.
and he's you know, talking his paycheck. They pay him to write that stuff, which is really. Did I say he was a good guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to
He's a good guy who can be bought. So, yeah, and you guys brought up a couple other things too, and we talked about the information that comes back, which we might perceive as negative. The Monsanto case, whenever they dropped it, that was revealed the week before Thanksgiving. Currency manipulation by China came out on December 26th, 2 years ago. They did it the day after Christmas. And whenever China violated Iranian sanctions, was importing oil, that story came out on the 4th of July. So fear your holidays, because you don't know what news is coming out. Timing is everything. So fortunately, we have people watching it. But there's a question that I have to ask you, Joe, and that is lobbyists. They got money and power, right? And I guess it's a two-part question. How much money, how much power does that exert? And you're gonna give me a frightening answer there, fear. And then the other thing is, what works for people in Congress? Okay, what's effective?
First of all, most of us don't show up, so therefore lobbyists have a whole bunch of influence. Citizens United case is just really harmed our democracy. Citizens United case was the one in which corporations were granted free speech and can give as much money as they want to anybody they want. So money is a huge influencer now, especially, well, it's getting where it's an influencer even in the States. So, but it's just a bad outcome. It's a very bad outcome for a U.S. Supreme Court decision. There's a whole line of cases. It started off with a clerk making a footnote. Lincoln was elected by the railroad barons. You ever wonder how a lawyer from Illinois got to be president of the United States? He was a railroad lawyer. He was elected by the railroads, pushed by the railroads, because they wanted to own the Supreme Court, because they wanted to have individual protection so that they could continue to build out the railroads and take land. Lincoln got elected and then refused to appoint the guy to the Supreme Court that was shifting the balance. But the clerk of the court wrote a footnote in the case, and the next court picked up the footnote. And from there we get Citizens United. So lobbyists and money, huge influence, almost overpowering. Almost overpowering. I still believe I'm a populist. I'm a Thomas Jefferson kind of guy. Other than I don't believe every 7 years we need an armed revolution. I thought he was wrong on that. I do think we need a revolution at the ballot box. I know the one gentleman was talking about we're having a revolution now around food. But I do think, and we had a discussion last night at dinner, you know, I think you have to engage. It's not enough just to invest in these local food efforts. That's not going to heal this. We have to engage the politics. We have to change the policies at the federal and state level if we're really going to win this, and that's going to take each of us. I believe that the coalition that we demonstrated in Missouri, recognizing who our real enemies are and who our friends can be, and having that dialogue will give us the clout, the people clout, to begin to win again. I am banking everything I have on it. I believe it with all of my heart. People win in the end. Legislators like getting reelected. Just an odd little thing. They can't get reelected unless they're citizens. I mean, ask Cantor, right? You know, I don't remember how much he outspent his opponent, and his Tea Party opponent won. You know, great leader in the Congress, no longer going to be there. Ultimately, the people can win if they focus, they don't listen to the fear tactics, they recognize who their real friends are and who their real enemies are, and they go to the ballot box. Most legislators, if they get 10 to 20 handwritten letters or individual phone calls, will respond to an issue. Okay? That's congressional. U.S. Senate a little bit larger. So it doesn't take a world to even get them to focus on an issue. However, to make them really make reformational kind of change, they have to... Animal welfare people are some of the greatest at coming at the issue and filling up mailboxes and telephone calls. I'm very proud of them for that. The thing that they also need to do, though, is to demonstrate that to the relevant. Representative Lee was here yesterday from Colorado. He does great work on the animal welfare front as well as other fronts. He was given kudos yesterday for here in this organization here. But unless someone goes out and also makes sure he gets reelected, it does no good. Doesn't matter how many calls you make on your issue if you don't also make sure you're supporting your guy or gal in election year. But people make the difference. People can where we were outspent 3-1. Social media. With social media today and people, we can win. We had posts in Missouri on a single day, we had 1 million potential voters, and we had posts hitting 100,000. I had a young lady named Angela Huffman running our social media campaign. We were hitting 100,000 to 110,000 views on a post. We made that campaign go viral, using food as the gateway. So I think in the end, if you engage, use these new platforms that are available, enter into a dialogue with other communities, build that coalition of common interest and community, we can beat the money and the influence of the lobbyists in the Capitol halls. Final note, one of the saddest days of my life was when we were trying to pass this ag bill back in the 90s. We had a rally on the Capitol, and it did pass in the end. Mike was there, as we indicated earlier. Lady comes up to me, a farm wife. She apologized. I was at her state senator. She apologized to me that she had to come to the Capitol to ask me to help farmers. I said, ma'am, this Capitol belongs to you. I said, you can bet that the industrialized ag boys have 2 or 3 lobbyists walking this hall every day, knocking on my door, trying to sit in a chair in my office to tell me how I ought to vote. You have to come to the Capitol. You have to engage. If there's a lobby day, go to it. If it's on your side, well, go to the other guy's side too. But have lobby day, go there. The best lobby day is in district. If you haven't called up and sat down with a staff member of your congressman or your U.S. senator, because you can't, they're busy, you don't always get through that. If you haven't done that this year, you need to do it. It's your government. It belongs to you. You have every right to let your voice be heard on behalf of your issues.
What Joe says reminds me of Franklin Roosevelt whenever people were dissatisfied with his rate of change and they wanted more done, more policies, more issues. And Franklin Roosevelt had to deal with the realities that Joe's talking about. And Franklin Roosevelt responded to them, make me do it. Make me do it. So it takes a lot of voices to do it. Do we have some questions up here? I see one here. We'll get the microphone down to you.
You started out talking about the externalization costs of industrial ag, and Mike, we had this fabulous economist who used to teach at Colorado College And he had this, I thought, fantastic idea that industrial ag should never be zoned agricultural, it should always be zoned industrial. Because the only way that it was profitable was that all the rest of us pay the external costs. And I wondered, I thought that was brilliant. Mike, who was that? What was his name?
Let me think.
Okay.
Judy.
But I'm just wondering if he, is he the only one? Is there a movement? Because it seemed to me to be an incredibly rational idea.
We've got a member on our Colorado advisory board, HSUS advisory board, by the name of Carrie. Now, Carrie is the executive director for the American Grassfed Association, and she constantly drives that point. These are not farmers. These are not farms. These are factories, and they should be zoned industrial. And we, I think, have to push that a lot harder. I really believe that that's an angle that we need to work much harder on it. And when you talked about Iowa, you talked about Missouri being able to swim in the, or at least go fishing in the river. And what's Dr. Eichert? What percent of the rivers in Iowa are now polluted? I mean, we have got a disaster on our hands with this industrial agriculture. It's going to self-eliminate. The question is, how much damage is it going to do first? With the algae bloom
Now, 100 people in Toledo become ill because of the toxins from the algae bloom, and in their waste, in their water management plan, they do not even include manure because of all the factory farms. They don't want to offend the factory farmers. The governor announces he's got an answer. He's going to just put more tax money into the cities who need to clean up their water. Again, externalizing that cost on the backs of taxpayers, not on the backs of these factories, this industrialized ag. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm with you. I'll tell you. I get up every day with HSUS to fix that problem, and I ask everybody in this room to put aside our differences. Let's find the common ground, because any one of us, any one community, whether you're the foodie community, the good food movement, whether you're the environmentalist community, whether you're the animal welfare community, or you're the sustainable ag community, we're not winning individually. But together and collectively, we can win. That's my message today. Find that common ground. Embrace your brother or sister in the environmental movement or on the farm or ranch or in the animal welfare movement. Find that common ground, and then together let's charge. Let's mount up and let's charge. We will win.
Judith, Bill Weeda was the professor at CC. Chris, you should have helped us with that.
I know him very well.
Yeah. Socially Responsible Ag Project. Wonderful
They'll be
organization.
speaking right after.
And you're going to get to meet Kendra Kimbroskas with that organization soon here.
You bring up a good point, zoning agriculture to avoid substantial real estate taxes. I live up the road in Douglas County, and so many of these real estate developers holding the properties until it's time to give birth to houses. They till the land, the prairie, once a year in order to qualify for the agricultural zoning, and they're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars in property taxes. That's an interesting citizens' revolt starting at the local level.
At least they're not polluting, but the industrial ones are polluting.
Maybe not overtly, but the tilling of the land does have consequences. We have a question up here, please.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Joe and Mike, I'm certainly very supportive of this collaboration that you're all pushing. I'm curious, Joe, how many HSUS members do you have in Colorado?
Our constituent base is over 100,000.
So I thought it was pretty big.
Yeah, I think it's closer to 160. Jack's not here, our state director.
The last number I had read was 167,000.
There you go.
Well, Joe looks like a guy to me and acts like a guy that kind of likes to walk the talk. Where are any of those 100,000 members at this meeting? Those are the people that need to hear what we've been hearing here for the last 2 days.
I think that's right. And one of the things that I work very hard on, half of the time I work at educating the animal welfare community the importance to care about the agricultural community. I did the same discussion. Mike's been to some of them with our organization. We're going to have a meeting with our ag council and our state council and our membership. Can't remember the date. I know Mike's going to be there. Mike Markarian, our chief policy officer.
What kind of effort did you make to get any of those people here today, yesterday?
Well, we put it up on our Facebook page.
Well, that's cute.
Well, and Reed,
And did send it out.
what I see, Reed, is we got a lot of puppy and cat lovers.
Well, yeah.
And they have not made the connection to pigs and
Right.
chickens.
Yeah, but that's what we're trying to do, is make.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, and we do have a meeting, as I was saying, we have a meeting planned specifically
Jim.
for them to have that conversation.
What was that again, Joe?
We do have a meeting coming up where Mike Markarian, who's our Chief Policy Officer for the Humane Society of the United States, is coming to Colorado with our Vice President of State Affairs, our State Director, our Ag Council members, our State, HSUS State Council, to have that conversation as an organization.
And Reed, let me just make it one other quick point. We had an event in Denver here a few weeks ago called Hoofing It. HSUS Ag Council sponsored that event in Colorado. And basically what it was is a 4-night event where there were 4 restaurants per night, and it started out with bison, lamb, pork, and beef. And we were the beef night. And so it was really an HSUS Family Farm Ag Council operation to promote the connection between those restaurant owners and chefs and the supplier, the raiser of the livestock. And it was all meat, right? HSUS got major pushback from the vegan community. And they have a lot louder voice than they have pocketbooks, and their pocketbooks are big. And the fact is, that night, before that event was over, that last night, HSUS had lost $500,000 in funding. And they stood by their guns. They did not waver. They said, this is the mission we're on. Working with farmers and ranchers helps more animals live better lives than anything that we know how to do. We're talking billions of animals living better lives when you're able to work with family farmers and ranchers as opposed to factory farms.
And yeah, we will continue. We have a program, The Real Cost of Food. We've not brought that to Colorado. We're in Ohio, Nebraska, Missouri with that program, trying to highlight the differences. But again, I do want to reiterate, about half of the time I spend educating the animal welfare community on the importance of joining the community that I'm talking about. So it's my job is a big job. Wayne Caselli, the president and CEO of HSUS, saw a vision that he and I shared. In isolation or in silos, none of us were going to win. Couldn't we get together and have a dialogue and together move forward? But it is still a lift, whether you're in the animal welfare community, the environmentalist community. They're taught oftentimes to hate every farmer or rancher. You know, that's the enemy. So there are barriers that we're continuing to have to break down on all fronts. So I'm not here just trying to lecture to the agricultural side. I have the same spiel I give to the other side.
But it is easier to talk to somebody over a meal.
That's right.
Especially if it tastes good and doesn't make you sick afterwards, right? And I tell vegetarians all the time, the Range Foods Direct has a vegetarian recovery program. And oftentimes it works. Now, it hasn't worked too well on a lot of the vegans, but honestly, it works pretty well on a lot of the vegetarians.
Well, you don't have to give up.
Give up your vegetarian lifestyle to
That's
be
right.
concerned about these issues.
That's exactly right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, that is exactly right. But it does take, within all these communities, for so long, we've all worked in isolation, the communities I named. Some of us have done so because we were taught that those other communities were our enemy. In some of the environmentalists that I visit with, or animal welfare I visit with, they've been trained, or their thought process is that everybody in agriculture is bad. You know, they see the videos, they see the films, they see the horrors of these factories where these animals are abused, or the environment with the pipes sticking out and just running into the creeks and the streams, and they read about Des Moines, Iowa, and those taxpayers are just furious. And so it is a big lift. I'm not suggesting that it's easy. But I am suggesting to all the communities, to include the one that gives me a paycheck, that we have to sit down at the table, we have to have a dialogue, and together we can find common ground that benefits each of us in our own individual issues. And thank you very
If I
much.
may-
Maybe next year, if this meeting's still here, we could have some of the 50,000 or so HSUS members here in Colorado Springs come.
Yeah.
come.
Yeah, I think that we can. I actually, to be truthful, I actually dropped the ball on that. Aaron could tell you the story and didn't get all that in time. So, but I will just confess that now. Mike was protecting me a little bit, but some of that's my own fault, but I will correct that.
Reed, I was so excited about this venue and what might be possible with college students and that, the animal welfare community and many others that I thought would be interested in this meeting, that we arranged for the viewing of this meeting outside. I thought every seat in this place would fill with this exciting agenda that we had. So,
Well,
So
you know,
Angela's going to make this go viral.
but
So
hey,
they are indeed going to see this.
Yeah, Angela's still out there. She'll make this go viral for us.
With
That's
the
our-
video we have,
Yeah, the
yeah.
video is going to live beyond the meeting.
But I think can I just add one thing?
Of course.
You know, I do think HSUS wants to be a part of this dialogue. And I think all of us learned a lot. This is really one of the first. We did host one, HSUS did with a group in Missouri. But this is really kind of the second time we need to do more. We accept that as constructive criticism. And we will find better ways. This is a message that needs to get out, this type of forum with these great leaders that came here, expended their funds to be here, a long list. It was not the fact that we didn't have the right folks in the room, but I will work hard with others to find better ways to get the word out and find what's the hook they're looking for that would get them here. And so I do want to accept that as great constructive criticism, but and recognize that we need to do better. I need to do better.